Warvan, you shall be avenged.
'Cause you belong to the city, you belong to the night.
Give me Chris and give me Robert. Gentlemen. Name something you do in a movie theater besides watching a movie. Yes, let's see. Robert, you buzz in first.
Outrageous. Use your mobile device.
Use your mobile device. And survey says... Texting is 4. Have a chance to steal. Chris?
Oh, we got this.
Chris?
Eat popcorn.
Bang, bang! The Americans will play first.
Sometimes I want to punch you in your perfect teeth.
After the massive success and the critical reception of 2012's The Avengers, Marvel was quick to secure plans for Avengers 2. Joss Whedon, who had worked wonders for the first one, returned to write and direct this installment of the biggest film series in the biggest movie franchise of all time. One hurdle this movie would have that its predecessor didn't was that this movie would need to introduce major characters within the story. No new Avengers had been introduced since the first movie. Sure, War Machine and Falcon get cameos, but the only major Avengers add before the very ending of the movie were introduced within this movie. That actually puts this movie at disadvantage. Sure, one thing the original Avengers did was to make sure to reintroduce us to all the characters, even though these characters had mostly already been introduced in other movies. But still, it is important for the movie to stand on its own. And even with introducing those characters in the original, it's not like they really messed with any origin or backstory. One way to combat this would be just to make this movie longer. I never have any problem with a 3-hour movie, as long as it's entertaining enough that I don't get bored during that time. But this movie actually ended up clocking in slightly under the original's runtime, meaning that this movie needed to do more than the first movie with less time. And this movie shows some evidence of some really hard cuts, many of which will be brought up later. There were heavy rumors that an extended edition would be released. However, Joss Whedon squelched these rumors, and with the Blu-ray release, it seems like we may not actually get any sort of extended edition. But then again, it's clear that large amounts have been carved from this movie, yet only 4 deleted scenes were included? Surely there's more content, and in the age of digital disc, surely the studio didn't trash the other deleted scenes. So it seems likely that those scenes have been put aside for some reason. So even though an extended edition has yet to be officially announced, it seems as though at least an edition with the rest of the deleted scenes is likely to pop up in the future. But I cannot review a movie that wasn't released, only the one that was. So what problems did this cut of the movie endure? Here's an issue that wouldn't exist if these were all standalone movies, but they aren't. Marvel wants to do a cinematic universe, and I'm loving it so far, but having these two be romantic makes for a fairly noteworthy problem, and I'm not talking about how Black Widow and Captain America had good chemistry in The Winter Soldier.
If it was the other way around, and it was down to me to save your life, and you'd be honest with me, would you trust me to do it?
I would now.
Good chemistry doesn't mean guaranteed relationship. It just means good friendship.
You're damn right.
This movie has a solid setup for a relationship between these two. They must have trained together so that Natasha can control Hulk to a degree. The Hulk would have to trust her at an instinctual level, which means these two probably spent a lot of time together. A relationship doesn't seem all that far-fetched. The big issue I see is with Betty Ross. Sure, it's been 7 years since we've seen her character, and Bruce did run off on her to protect her from the Hulk, but what happens when they meet back up? When they met up in The Incredible Hulk after a separation, she instantly drops her current boyfriend to be with Bruce. What happens if she pops up and Bruce is with Natasha? It felt like Bruce and Betty were just destined to be together. It seems as though if Betty did pop up, Bruce would just drop Natasha just as quickly as she dropped her boyfriend. The core of the problem is, why should the audience get invested in a relationship that is clearly doomed to fail?
Water's cold.
No shit.
you even pulling?
Are you on my team?
Just represent, pull.
All right, let's go.
When Ultron first arrives, we have the entire Avengers team, plus Maria Hill, Dr. Cho, and War Machine, who is quickly brushed aside in the fight. But then, during the planning, he's seen in the room rubbing his arm. Perhaps it's seriously injured. Wouldn't it be nice if the Avengers had a doctor that could instantly look at their injuries and treat them? Oh shit, they do! Well, they should probably call that doctor in. Oh shit, their doctor is right there. So, either she's ignoring Rhodey's injury, or it's not a major injury and doesn't require any noteworthy treatment. And that would make sense. She proved to be a miracle worker with Hawkeye's injury about 15 minutes earlier, and Hawkeye's injury looked way worse.
The nanomolecular functionality is instantaneous. His cells don't know they're bonding with simulacrum.
So if Rhodey didn't suffer any serious injury, why does he vanish after that scene? Sure, he comes back at the end, but there's a whole second act where he just vanishes. What happened? Did he need to feed his dogs and didn't have a neighbor's phone number? Where did he go?
Now this is gonna be a good story.
Why wouldn't he be instantly recruited to help the Avengers? I would think when you're fighting an opponent of unknown power levels, you'd want all the help you can get.
Have you been juicing? A little vibranium cocktail? You're looking, I don't want to say puffy.
Even if he was only just there as backup. Surely a superhero working with you is better than a superhero chilling at his place with a mildly sore arm.
Okay, what?
Lots of people hate how Ultron was characterized. I almost included it in this list, but I didn't because I kinda like it. He's quirky and weird while still having just enough menace to be threatening.
People create smaller people? Children! I lost the word there.
But I will say the advertising for this movie did its best to make Ultron seem like just a super badass villain who can take any Disney song and make it scary.
There's only one path to peace. Your extinction. There are no strings on me.
I can get the disappointment. I remember people talking like this guy would be the MCU's answer to the Joker.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got them?
Which, at the time, seemed like it might actually be true.
Oh, for God's sake.
But looking back on it, Ultron wasn't even close. Still, for what we actually got, I do enjoy him. He's different from your traditional super evil villain that Marvel has just way too many of in their movies. For me, the issue is not Ultron's personality, but his plan. Ultron's plan almost instantly falls apart. He wants to destroy humanity, but then he wants Scarlet Witch to get in their heads instead of killing them instantly so that they don't die as martyrs.
And when you get inside the rest of their heads
Everyone's plan is not to kill them.
and make them martyrs, you need patience. Need to see the big picture.
If his plan is to kill all humanity, who gives a shit if they die as martyrs? How does that affect his grand plan in any way? Wouldn't it actually be preferred to eliminate the greatest threat to your plan as quickly as possible? But this is probably due to Ultron's petulant personality.
What? I'm not. You think I'm one of Stark's puppets, his hollow men. Look at me. Do I look like Iron Man? Stark is not.
So, what is his plan to destroy humanity? Well, it's the simplest plan in the world. First, he slowly launches a country into the air, then once it's high enough, he'll drop it, and the impact will hit the Earth like a giant meteor, wiping out most of the human population very quickly. Hell, how do you even think of doing a plan like this? I can't even imagine the logistics of lifting a country into the air. Is finding and unleashing a killer virus too much work? I mean, hell, almost instantly Maria Hill comes up with a better plan to destroy humanity than Ultron uses in this movie.
He's in your files, he's in the internet. What if he decides to access something a little more exciting?
Nuclear codes.
Nuclear codes.
If he could get the nuclear codes, it would be so easy. With the codes, he could launch against Russia, and Russia would launch nukes to retaliate, and boom! A huge chunk of the population would be killed. What, is this plan just too 1997 for Ultron? Okay, so he does have a speech about liking meteors, so perhaps he doesn't want to nuke the world.
I think a lot about meteors, the purity of them.
But still, if he really wants to destroy humanity, he should shoot for a simpler plan. And I'm not speaking from a character standpoint, I'm speaking from a narrative standpoint. If you want your audience to be invested in the situation, you have to try to make it somewhat relatable. The idea of a robot designed to unleash a killer virus could be scary. The idea of a robot lifting a country only to drop it down later isn't so scary simply because it's ridiculously impractical. I'm not saying a superhero movie needs to be realistic at all, but when your villain is going out of their way to do something that should be a lot simpler, it makes them a lot less threatening.
Soon.
How soon? I'm not being pushy.
Remember back in Iron Man 3? Tony went insane building ridiculous amounts of armor in order to protect those he loved, only to realize he didn't need all those fancy armors. But in this movie, we see him back in his Iron Man armor, which is totally fine. Just because he retired the old armors doesn't mean he won't make a new one. After all, the movie was about how he is Iron Man even without his armors, not how he no longer wishes to be Iron Man. But then he also has an army of automated Iron Man robots, and very quickly it's starting to feel like he forgot the third movie. He's right back to trying to make technology to protect everyone. I thought the point of Iron Man 3 was that he didn't feel the need to make non-stop armors and fruitless efforts to protect more than he really could. I thought he had gotten over his overdependence on these armors. But you know what? It's certainly possible that Tony did some backpedaling between movies, and it would be easy for him to fall into that habit since what he's trying to do is protect the world. With intentions like that, how can he not try? But then we get to the creation of Ultron, which really seems a bit confusing. Tony reveals a program far more complex than Jarvis within the Infinity Gem on the Scepter.
This could be the key to creating Ultron.
How? Just because it's a bigger program than Jarvis doesn't mean it's more capable of protecting people than Jarvis. Was the ultimate peacekeeping program that Tony needed just sitting in the gem, just waiting for him to pluck it? Doesn't that seem like a rather extreme coincidence? I get that this isn't the actual program, it's just a baseline for what Tony will model the program after, but how does he know that's a good idea? Perhaps the reason it's bigger and more complex than Jarvis is because this program contains all the porn on the internet. It feels very much like, hey guys, I found a new program. Let's see how it does if I give it access to the most advanced technology in the world.
Oh, for God's sake.
But you know what? Screw it. If Tony doesn't fuck around with this program, the movie will get pretty boring pretty fast. So Tony creates Ultron, and Ultron dedicates himself to destroying humanity. Standard villain stuff, really. Then the Avengers secure Ultron's new custom-made, super powerful body, and immediately Tony thinks, hey, let's stick another one of my custom computer programs in there, because it worked so well the last time. Sure, this time it's just Jarvis he's sticking in there, but it's a body made by Ultron. Ultron even uploaded a part of himself into the body.
We can initiate the consciousness stream.
And you just assume that Jarvis's operational matrix can beat Ultron's?
Jarvis has been beating him from inside without knowing it.
Tony's logic of Jarvis beating Ultron doesn't make sense because Jarvis didn't actually beat Ultron. Jarvis hid from Ultron and fought him in the shadows. Fact is, Tony is so thick in this movie, just why would anyone make an insane killing machine and think, oh, you know what? Let's try this again.
That's it. You just roll over, show your belly every time somebody snarls.
Only when I've created a murder bot.
And here's the kicker. All of this would have made much more sense if post-Vision Thor just popped up and revealed that Tony's ideas and plans for Jarvis must be followed up. But I guess we need an Avengers vs. Avengers scene in here.
Earth's mightiest heroes pulled us apart like cotton candy.
Seems like you walked away all right.
I don't like you.
The first act seems alright, but as soon as it ends, we start seeing some serious gaps in the story. I already brought up how Rhodey is there, and then gone without explanation. Then we immediately see the twins going to visit Ultron almost as soon as he leaves Avengers Tower, without any indication of how they knew about Ultron at all. This, we know, was a scene cut out.
The man says me to come to the church.
What man?
The Iron Man.
Then we have Captain America's dream sequence, which doesn't seem to go anywhere. Why keep this in the movie when you have so many more vital scenes to leave in? Then we get Thor's scene where he goes on his side quest and picks up Dr. Selvig for unknown reasons. Again, this is explained in a deleted scene.
You think they'll talk to you?
No. They'll talk to you. No, but no one's expected to sacrifice for this privilege. They feed on life.
You're the sacrifice.
I have more life than most.
Then we have Bruce just stumbling into Black Widow after she's been captured by Ultron. We just see Thor knock down a wall, Bruce walks in, then Bruce by himself with a big gun breaks Widow out. It just all feels very haphazard.
What? No!
Ultron, in a fit of rage, chops off Ulysses Claw's arm, but he did make sure to heat up his hand to cauterize the injury so Claw won't bleed out.
I'm sorry. I'm sure that's gonna be okay. I'm sorry.
An ability we never see Ultron use again, but maybe it's just a variation on his energy blast, so sure. Problem is, since Ultron clearly did it in a fit of rage, why in that instant would he care if Claw bled out? I'll tell you why right now. It's an obscure program in Ultron's system called the MPAA. See, he can do all types of violence and even go as far as chopping off an arm and still be PG-13. But start showing some blood and you'll get an R rating. I don't even begin to understand this. Okay, so when you do an excessive gore scene, you get an R rating, and I get that, sure. But since when does blood count as excessive gore? Why is it fine to show a little bit of blood occasionally, but not every time there's an injury? Why is it fine to show a guy lose an arm, but not cool to show the effects of that arm loss? What about blood suddenly makes this movie a hard R? Why are super violent movies without blood PG-13, while a movie like Chef gets an R rating because the characters say fuck too much?
But it's very, very special because if you can see, the numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board.
This movie largely feels like a repeat of the first Avengers. You like the Avengers bickering? Well, this movie has that, except more.
Whoa. It's going around. Come on, use your words, buddy. I have more than enough words to describe you, Stark.
You like the funny banter the characters had? This movie has that, except more.
I am Thor, son of Odin, and as long as there is life in my breast, I am running out of things to say.
Did you like how the main villain was fallible with a quirky sense of humor? Well, this movie has that, except more.
Is that why you've come? To end the Avengers?
I've come to save the world. But also,
Did you like how in Act 2 the Hulk rages and one of the Avengers has to hold him back? Well, this movie has that, except more.
I'm sorry.
Like how the Avengers fight tons of evil minions in the final battle? Well, this movie has that, except more.
Is that the best you can do?
You had to ask.
And here's where it gets bizarre, because none of the things I mentioned above are done poorly at all. It's all quite entertaining. It just feels very much like we've done this before.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
Many view this movie as a failure, and to a certain degree they're right. Joss Whedon said he wanted this movie to be smaller, more personal, more painful, and not a rehash of what worked the first time. Using this standard, this movie is a complete failure. It feels very much like more of the same that worked so well in the original. It's not identical by any means, but the feeling of just going bigger with stuff that worked in the original is very present. I have real trouble with my number 1 and number 2 choices. The editing here is really rough, and the movie moves at a downright jerky pace at times because of it. It's possible that the stuff cut was the stuff that fleshed out the story more, the stuff that separates this movie from the first, the key ingredients that set this movie as an entirely different entity from the first Avengers. And if that's true, then the editing is actually the number 1. But I can't judge that because that version has yet to be seen. I can only judge this movie as it is, not as it should be. Tony's motivation is clear and works well with his character. He has since the very beginning been a character that is less interested in making peace and more interested in imposing peace, which is perhaps his greatest problem. And what we see here is him imposing peace until the worst possible outcome. His motivation is crystal clear, not just from his vision at the beginning of the movie, but since he was trapped in that cave in the original Iron Man. Even though I can be critical of Tony's actions throughout this movie, he's always been a careless guy, so even seeing him in the mad scientist role, typically allowed only to villains, I can't say it really feels out of character for him.
We're mad scientists. We're monsters, buddy. We've got to own it.
Disappointing is a good word I can use to describe this movie, but it's also worth noting that disappointing and bad do not mean the same thing. The original Avengers had no right being as good as it was. For a movie to be that hyped and deliver as completely as it did is unprecedented. So for this movie to pretty much just offer more of the same except not as well delivered, the word disappointing seems to fit perfectly. Lots of stuff that could be tweaked and improved, but I would be lying if I said this movie wasn't a lot of fun. What we have is a very entertaining movie, albeit a very flawed one. The first movie was groundbreaking, and I think it's easy to forget that because it's just a summer popcorn movie. But summer popcorn movie doesn't automatically mean bad or dumb. It just means that the movie is a spectacle, and that's what most people go to the movies for, to see a spectacle. I'm reminded of X-Men Days of Future Past when reviewing this movie. Another comic book movie that had a lot of flaws and was based liberally on a comic book storyline, though shockingly Days of Future Past was more accurate. Then again, the Days of Future Past is a classic comic book story arc, while the Age of Ultron comic book story arc is a muddled mess that starts as a huge epic crossover event, but then devolves to Invisible Woman's and Wolverine's adventures through time. So the movie Age of Ultron is a huge improvement over the comic book arc. Days of Future Past was a much better paced movie, but with the exception of Wolverine, the characters in Age of Ultron are all better. Even with Ultron's issues, I'll take him over seeing Magneto betray the X-Men again. All in all, I would consider these two movies fairly equal. I would give them both an 8 out of 10. If you go into Age of Ultron and just as good as the first movie, you're gonna be disappointed. But if you go in expecting fun, you should have a blast here. I would consider it the 6th best film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that I've reviewed so far.
Who's your daddy?